Hey everyone, we're just going to wait for a few more people to join the session, and then we'll kick off. Just before we get started, and as you join the webinar, just wanted to make you aware that we have a knowledge base on our website that you can access from your tenant. We can send out instructions of how to do that after this as well, and you'll find loads of insightful articles and pieces there that will let you really take your gatekeeper knowledge up to another level. There's lots of walkthroughs of how to set up various pieces. So yeah, definitely check out the knowledge base if you aren't familiar with it. And yeah, you'll get a lot of value out of that. James, who's joining me on the call today for this webinar, spends a lot of his time creating a lot of content there to help you all out, and he's one of the best at it.
You'll also find this webinar linked there afterwards as well, and all our previous ones. So another reason to head to the knowledge base if you haven't already.
Yeah, definitely. And just one other plug whilst we're waiting for some more people to join. We actually launched a podcast back at the start of February, and it's called Procurement Reimagined. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much anywhere there are podcasts. It's on YouTube as well. And we're inviting all sorts of procurement experts onto there to come talk procurement, vendor management, every aspect of what we do, the full end-to-end cycle, from sourcing to post-signature, contract management, third-party risk management. And maybe as a little point, if any of you wish to come talk with me on that, I would love to have you and to have you on as a guest. So please reach out to me if that is something of interest. I'm just going to give this maybe 30 more seconds, and then we'll get started on today's session. Okay, we're going to make a start now. It looks like numbers are kind of settling. So once again, thanks for joining this session. This is our vendor and contract visibility customer success hours. This is going to be focused on using data, and I'll get into that a little bit more. I just wanted to formally introduce James here. James is our learning experience designer, and I'm Daniel. I'm community manager here at Gatekeeper, also ex-customer of Gatekeeper. So I'm a bit of a Gatekeeper fanboy and joined Gatekeeper after using the product for about 18 months and really enjoying the use of it. So what is this series about? The series of webinars that we're currently putting on is designed to upskill you in every single aspect of your use of the Gatekeeper platform. So for example, in today's session, we're going to focus on 3 key areas. So we're going to focus in on the quarterly dashboard. So this will enable you to better manage your renewals within a 3-month period, your risks and your obligations that you have set up. Then we're going to move on to look at teams, categories, and entity dashboards. And these may be areas within Gatekeeper that you're not too familiar with. Some of you may use them all the time, of course. And this is a different way to view and chop up your data. And I've always found it to be incredibly beneficial, especially the category and entity dashboards. And once we've done that, we're going to go into something called saved views, which you can access via your vendor and contract records. And this is where you can quickly access your data via saved views of the data that you've created. So for example, you could create a view of contract end dates. You could have one around data privacy, where you track the transfer of personal data, or even ESG. So we're going to go through all of this in this webinar session, and we're bringing it back as a point throughout the webinar. But just before we get into the meat of this webinar episode, I'm just going to talk about our 3 pillars. Connie, who is our wizard in the background here, thank you for changing the slide there. This is the Gatekeeper 3 pillars. So we've got 3 of them: restore visibility, take control, and safeguard compliance. Now, the way we see this is that every Gatekeeper customer, if they follow the stairway approach, they'll get the most out of the platform. So restoring visibility is focused on where your data is, how people can view it within your organization, so that you know everything that's going on. We then have take control, which effectively, at its simplest, is the digitalization of your vendor management and contract management processes. And then we move on to safeguard compliance. This is the third-party risk management piece here. So this is where you automate vendor compliance, identify, track risks, and move from a reactive to a proactive approach to risk management. So we're on the visibility pillar at present. And in the next webinar session, we'll start to move over to the take control piece. So that's everything I wanted to cover at the start of this webinar. We're actually just going to run a quick poll, and we're going to do this at the start of every single webinar episode. And this poll is around how familiar you are with our platform. So Connie, could you run the poll? Thank you. That's great. Thanks. And what we'll see from this poll is we might be able to tailor this session to suit your needs a little bit. If for example you're all experts, then we can change some of the content we're talking about here. James, whilst the poll is ongoing, could you bring up the executive dashboard?
Yeah.
We will start where I think almost every gatekeeper user who comes in, this is probably a screen that everyone is familiar with. So we'll start off from the executive dashboard to start with. That's great.
Yeah. Well, we can call back
Cheers,
to this
James.
one later as well.
Yeah, yes, certainly. That's great. We're just going to give this poll maybe 5-10 more seconds just to see where we're at with that. If Connie, if you can close it in the next 5 seconds or so, and we'll see what sort of responses we've got there. Great. Awesome. So actually, just looking at the responses here, predominantly beginners to Gatekeeper. So actually, I think this is going to be a super beneficial session for you. If you have any questions at any time, please use the Q&A in the Zoom window. We've got a team that will answer them in the chat there for you. And as we're going through it, I'll be keeping tabs on the questions that are coming through, and we can hopefully get back to you or review some of those in real time. But James, we're going to be looking at the quarterly dashboard. So maybe just to start with, we've got the executive dashboard here, kind of gives you the snapshot of your total contract value, all of the contracts and vendors you've got. I really like the contract renewals timeline here, but we do have multiple different dashboards, and we're going to focus in on the quarterly one. So could you just maybe navigate us over to that? And then once we're here, maybe give a bit of a rundown of what this does.
Yeah, absolutely. And you gave a really good elevator pitch of this at the outset of the call, actually. So you gave a good overview of what it's used for. But before I jump into what we're seeing, I think it's useful to highlight the use cases of when this dashboard is used and who uses it. So it's the case that maybe some of the users on this call are higher level admins in their Gatekeeper environment. So if they've been given access to everything, by default, their user permission will take them to that executive dashboard. And we went into a bit of detail on it in the last webinar you and I did, where we talked about the strategic insights and the oversight of spend and operations that it gives about organizations that are using Gatekeeper. This dashboard, the quarterly one, will be visited by default for users that don't have that complete visibility of the system. So if you don't have complete access to everything in Gatekeeper, this is your dashboard. And the reason being is, as you can see just by looking at it, it's very distilled. For contract managers who don't need those operational oversights and aren't looking at things from a bird's eye view, this is showing them just that key information. So when they're visiting Gatekeeper, they see some of the same bits. They get those counters across the top. So this is summarizing what the users have access to if they were to continue browsing Gatekeeper, if they were looking through their vendors and contracts repositories. This will show how many records I have access to in the system. Similarly, like you said, it gives you that oversight of how many tasks and approvals and obligations I have visibility of in the system. So obligations are what we in this environment have called events. And what you get in the center is you get a renewals timeline, but rather than being a long-term one like we saw on the executive dashboard, it just shows the user what's happening in the next quarter, the next 3 months for me, which contracts are coming up to their end date, which contracts are coming up to their notice period date. And then at the bottom, the other main aspect of this is an expansion of those obligations up here. I can see which specific tasks I need to be aware of in this table view here. And the reason for this, having it all distilled, is the first bit. Those users, if they don't have access to everything, they probably aren't doing operational oversight tasks. But also, it's more relevant information for a user that just wants to come in and see specifically what do they have to do, what do they have to be aware of. It's very useful. But I think, Daniel, you had a use case where back when you were a gatekeeper fanboy working in the system, even though you had the executive dashboard, I think you still liked using this. And we do see lots of people who have admin oversight coming here because it gives them that immediate sense of like, what tasks am I responsible for? What do I need to be aware of in the very near future?
Yeah, for sure. And it's that piece that you're on right now, right? The contract near an end date. But actually, more importantly, for me, is the contract near a notice period date. I was dealing with a lot of software contracts that had auto renewal clauses in, which are triggered by a notice period. So I was always very conscious of what's coming our way and which ones we may need to serve notice on. And what I really like about the quarterly dashboard is that it's a quick snapshot as opposed to going into a workflow where you can, depending on how many vendor cards you have in a workflow, can suddenly get very busy very quickly. I can just see straight away, maybe I've got 10, 14, however many contracts near a notice period date, and we can start assigning people or just making sure that people are on top of that. And I think it works hand in hand with a contract renewal workflow within Gatekeeper. You would almost argue that you don't necessarily need to be in here. I do like the snapshot and then using it in parallel with that workflow. But James, I was just thinking there, just as you were talking, you can get this set up as an email, right? Just to go out to various people within the business. Do you want to just quickly show everyone how they can do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, within their tenant. Cheers.
And that's worth noting. So for those users, those contract managers who this is their default dashboard and where they get a lot of the data, oftentimes you can't expect them to be logging into Gatekeeper every single day, or once a week or however often you would want them to be checking up on this information. And what they can do is, if they can do this from themselves, they can go to their settings area and they can enable these weekly summaries here. So they can say they want basically a snapshot of that dashboard dropped into their inbox every single Monday, just so that they aren't having to come to Gatekeeper and log in order to see that data. So they can turn that on themselves if they want. However, if we have some people on this call who are user admins, you can do that for some of those people. So you can go to settings, users, and this might be an ideal scenario actually, like Patrick O'Connor, who is the CEO in this environment. I might not expect him to be logging into Gatekeeper all the time. He's a very busy man. If it's the case that I do want him to see those key bits of information, like contracts that he needs to be aware of, I can edit his user, and you can see here, I can switch on those weekly summaries for Patrick if I wanted to, so that he gets those mail shots once a week.
Yeah, that's great, James. Appreciate you showing that. I think this is a good use case. Maybe just share a personal anecdote. My GC, who I used to work with, he loved coming into Gatekeeper, but also got a lot of value out of these weekly emails. And occasionally would send me very uncomfortable emails if he noticed something that maybe was nearing contract renewal a little bit too close to the wire that he didn't need. But that, again, I think is a really good thing, just being accountable to everyone in your business. I think this is really good for that. Great. So we're going to move away from the quarterly dashboard. If you have any questions around that, please just let us know, and we can always come back throughout this session to the quarterly dashboard, or we'll go through those at the end. But what we're going to go over now is 3 other areas. So this is moving into categories, entities, and teams. We're actually going to start off with the category dashboard. What I really like about these, and this is kind of what I said at the start, it gives you a view of data in a different way. And maybe just to set it up before you start going through this, James, is one massive use case that I used to use, especially the category dashboard for, was vendor consolidation. So just looking across our, say, for example, our software or hardware or consultancy spend, and seeing where we have duplication of vendors or where we have similar service that maybe we can amalgamate into one with another vendor, just to get a bit more concentrated, maybe leverage a bit more discounts and things like that. But James, I'll hand this over to you to run through categories now, please.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting use case. We can dive into that whilst we're in this view actually in a second. But before I actually jump into a category and talk about that, like just from this top level view, I think it's interesting to talk about some of the data that we get here. So like these columns on the left-hand side are data points pertaining to categories. We've obviously got the name of them, and we've got who's responsible for, you know, the most of the contracts that fall under that service. On the right here, though, these data points are sort of function, I guess, a bit like a dashboard. They're pulling data from other areas of Gatekeeper. So someone hasn't come here and typed out hardware has 32 categories and spends 13 million. This is pulling information from the contracts repository. So any contracts that are set up, either being added manually or via workflows, that are linked to the hardware category will automatically be pulled through to this view here. So this top level view in itself is just useful for seeing information around what's the live state of what we're spending money on in this environment. But yeah, let me actually jump into the software category to talk about that use case you described there. So we started on the exec dashboard, and I think you wanted to do that intentionally, didn't you, Daniel? Because basically this dashboard that we're looking at here is basically the same thing from a UI perspective. When you're on a particular category or entity or team, and we'll look at those in a minute, when you click into them, and if you can see the whole thing, you'll get that bird's eye view oversight of, you get that long-term renewals timeline in the middle, you get key vendor insights, like who are the top vendors that we're spending money with for this category, and you also see like what are the top value contracts that we're spending money on for the software category too. So this is a really nice landing page when you are viewing categories from that oversight perspective.
It's also good for other stakeholders in your business, right? I know CFOs, finance teams sometimes like to get a very quick view of what's going on within Gatekeeper. My CFO used to ask questions, and I could just send a link to the tenant, and they could see it in seconds and explore and get familiar with what's going on. I always found that extremely beneficial. So it's a good view here.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess this central's renewals timeline, I think you called it out on the exec dashboard because you like it, but it's also the case that this could be the one that's used if you're looking at cost consolidation from a contract standpoint. You can see where is the ability to, you know, get out of contracts if they're coming up to the end date or notice period date, depending on what you're viewing here. But if we take this a little bit further, when you're in a category like this, you can jump to this contracts tab here, and this will give you a pre-filtered repository level view of contracts that have been added to the contracts repository, but just showing you information around those that are specifically relevant to software in this case. And I have a saved view here. We can dive into this in a bit more detail later on when we actually go through creating saved views and exploring use cases. I just wanted to highlight it here because some of our users probably don't know that you can create saved views, not just in your central repositories for contracts and vendors. You can create them in a few different areas in Gatekeeper.
I didn't know until we, I'll be really open about that. I didn't realize that we had this feature here. I think it's incredibly useful. Like just in the preparation for this webinar, I only just discovered this myself. Really love it. James, I just wanted to call out before we jump into anything else. Like one really good thing here that we're seeing straight away is that we've got the contract and vendor data together. We've got the status and end date and annual value. That's all great. We've got contract types, which I really like to see. When I nerd out about contracts, I can see straight away here that we've got a whole bunch of statement of works, which probably means we have a master services agreement or something like that somewhere else. We've got some, what I would assume here are standalone subscription agreements. And I think that's maybe the two examples. Yeah. And we have an MSA there. So what I'm instantly thinking here is perhaps there's opportunities to consolidate a bit more when we have an MSA. Maybe there's some benefits there with whoever we're buying these from, but I just think it gives really good data to help with the planning exercise there. And then we're going to come on to these two other areas in a moment, but we actually get to see which entity we've got these contracts with and which team within our organization has this. So I just really like this oversight. I think it's a really cool way to give good visibility into our vendor contract data, and it just chops that data up in a different way, but gives a lot of value very quickly.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight that as well. Showing the entity and team here, I think, is one of those really useful points, because especially for our clients that are larger organizations that have multiple different operating entities, maybe by country or by what the services that they specialize in, and if they have different departments, being able to come here and see what are those different departments and entities spending on when it comes to a particular category like software is really useful. So in this particular environment, for instance, we have a marketing department over here that has a contract with Atlassian that might have its own MSA and set of contractual terms. And then we also have the IT team who have a separate contract with Atlassian. And that can be one of those areas where maybe they haven't communicated around if they're, both getting their own sets terms in place with a particular vendor, they're losing out on, negotiating power and things like that. So just being able to see it from this sort of view, I think is quite useful.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. That's a really good run through. Is it you wanted to go into Teams now, James?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. Let's head over to Teams.
Perfect.
So from this top level view, I just, before we jump into Teams and start talking about similar sort of activities that can take place here, I just want to highlight that basically a lot of this view is similar. So the left hand side is, this is information around the team that's specific to this this view here, but on the right hand side, a bit like we talked about over on categories, that's kind of dashboard-esque. These are data values that have been pulled in from other areas of Gatekeeper. So we have how many contracts are being held by these teams, we have what are they spending their budgets on, but we also have user counts here, just in case people who are interested in which teams have the most active users, which teams are the most active. You get those counters here, which is quite useful to see just from that operational standpoint. And these managers, I want to call this out just because it's worth bearing in mind. I know we're not at the workflow stage of any of these webinars yet, but it's worth bearing in mind that there's a few different purposes behind having team managers assigned here. The first one is the really simple one. It's a nice data point to be aware of. If someone's browsing the system and they want to ask the budget holder of the IT department a question around one of their vendors, around one of their contracts, seeing that here, knowing who's responsible for that department is useful. That assignment of the user there, though, can also influence their permissions. So assigning James Ince, who's actually me in this case, to be the owner of a particular department can influence what contracts they have access to in the system. And finally, like I said, we're not on to workflows yet. If it is the case that you have workflow or like contract setup processes that might require certain approvals, so let's say certain high value contracts, like a $100,000 contract expense, you want the budget holder to be signing off on it before you go into negotiations with the vendor, you can dynamically assign the user you've assigned here as the manager to give that approval during the workflow process. So that they're aware that the expense is going to be going out. They can confirm they're aware that's a service that's needed for their department.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a really nice visibility point, right? Like I appreciate that some organizations have a lot of teams and they can get very busy trying to figure out like who is that one person I need to go to on an issue. And sometimes you're just trawling through a org chart or something, and that can be painful. So I just like coming in here and doing that. But yeah, good overview there, James. Are we James, did you want to go over maybe one of the team dashboards just briefly? It's very similar to the other ones, and then we can move on to entities.
Sure. Let's go into product because it has the most contracts. So it'll be the best one to look at, really. So this is the same dashboard, the exec level dashboard that we saw in category and that we saw in the executive dashboard itself. You get the high level view of the renewals that are coming up for this specific department. So all the contracts that the product team holds. So if you did want to look at if the product team is over budget or under budget, where are their renewals coming up, things like that. And then similarly, who are the top vendors that they're operating with and what are they spending their money on contract wise? Mostly hardware and software by the looks of things here. And they get the same contracts breakdown view as well. So I can click through to this contracts tab too, and we can see what are those contracts that are held by the product team and their vendors.
Yeah, that's great, James. No, I appreciate running through that part. Let's move on to entities because there are a couple of slightly different views in entities that maybe teams will find really beneficial. So yeah, let's go through that now.
Sure. So from the top level, you've got the same data that we saw before. If I click into an entity, same dashboard as before, and they're all useful in their own right. Seeing renewals coming up for these different object types, like those categories and teams and now entities. What you get here, though, is as well as viewing the contracts, which has its own usage, you can see what is this particular business entity spending its money on. You can see you might want to sort by end dates or values of contracts and things of that nature. You get this extra tab, which I think is really interesting, which is a categories tab. So just like the categories view that we had over there, this one provided insight as to the whole Gatekeeper environment. What is the whole organization spending its money on? Whereas we have quite a lot of clients, if they do have different countries that they operate out of, they'll have entirely separate budgets and forecasts that they work to and things like that. So they can come here and click to the categories tab and see what is Gatekeeper Limited. So this will be the UK arm spending its money on, for instance. So we can see how much are we spending on facilities, hardware, recruitment, things of that nature. So I think this is a really useful tab to be aware of.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. No, that's great. That was so that was a run through of categories, teams, and entities. Very similar views to the executive dashboard, and they are primarily there for you to shortcut your access to data around those. This gives you a variety of ways of seeing your data around your vendors and contracts. And depending on your organization size or your team size or how you're structured, I think a lot of you will get a lot of benefit out of spending time in each of those. James, what we're going to do now, right? We're going to move into, I think, the vendor record, and we're going to start going through saved views. So maybe I'll hand this over to you, and you can explain what saved views are, because we've kind of we've shown a little bit, we've gone over it a little bit. But if you could just give us a definition of what saved views are, and then we'll do a live tutorial and we'll create one. And if anyone wants to see any data points added in, please let us know in the chat, and we'll just add them in as we're going through it. But yeah, over to you, James.
Well, we can create one to get started, right? Just so that people can see the how,
sure.
And then we can, because I've got a few use cases that, to exemplify it. So maybe we can create one to get started, just because it'd be useful to see. So, and you mentioned vendors, so I'll show the vendor repository ones in a second. But it's worth calling out, like we saw up when we were looking at categories and entities and so on, you can have saved views in quite a few different areas of Gatekeeper. If you're looking at a repository type view like this, you'll probably be able to configure it and save what you want. So as an elevator pitch, a saved view is a cut of the data, by which I mean a selection of fields that you want to see, like metadata points and filtered options for particular contracts or vendors, that you can store as like a pre-saved view, so that if you want to assess those particular metadata points later on, you don't have to reconfigure the columns and refilter all of the view. You can just save it and come back to it instantly later on. It's really useful. So I'll create one in the contracts view, and I want to create one in the contracts view. I'll explain why in a second, but I'll show how to do that. So at the moment, my view is something that I've just called standard view. I don't have any other saved views at the moment. The first step you want to take when configuring one is choosing the columns. So I can hit this configure columns button up here, and I'll choose a few fields. So the reason I wanted to do it in the contracts repository is because one thing that is really cool is in the contracts repository, you can not just select from the fields pertaining to contract metadata. And as you can see, I've got quite a lot, so I'm not going to choose too many. You can also choose vendor fields, which can be very useful, especially if you want to see information around the vendor relationship when looking at contractual terms and things like that. So I'm going to pull in information about the vendor. Let me see.
Could we go with vendor type? I just love vendor type as a data point. Just always have done. You've heard me talk about it like a million times in the last couple of months.
Categorizing your vendors. I'll also pull through some advanced vendor fields. I'll pull through Market IQ's cybersecurity data here as well. And let's see if we've got a GDPR and InfoSec question around our contracts. So I'll choose a field to do with whether this contract involves the processing of personal data. And then I'll hit save. And once we do that, we're sort of most of the way there to creating the save view. Gatekeeper instantly reloads at this point, pulling in all of those data points I've just selected. So we had vendor type has been pulled through here, as we can see. We've also got some Market IQ cybersecurity data as well. And then we've got information around personal identifiable information. Sorry, that was a mouthful.
PII. That's why everyone only ever refers to it as PII, James.
Sorry.
James, can you just scroll left, and maybe I'll just ask a slightly awkward question. How easy is it now just to remove? So, like, for example, here, maybe I don't want to see master record and I don't want to see internal business owner. Is it just a matter of just going back in and just getting rid of those?
It's as simple as it was to add the fields. You can just uncheck what you don't want. And if it's the case that we're not happy with the order as well, let's say I want vendor type to appear next to vendor, it's just a drag and drop function up there. So I can unselect some fields, like I'm going to get rid of those owner ones like you mentioned, and I'm going to hit save again. Instant Gatekeeper will reload my view, just showing me the fields that I've left in there and reordering them to appear where I wanted them. So vendor is next to vendor type, like we just updated.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got, this is a filtered view at present, and now we need to save the view to make it as
I didn't filter it yet. It's not
Okay,
filtered
go.
yet, Daniel.
Okay, go.
The next step, you're right. The next step in configuring a saved view, it's not mandatory, but it's very useful, is applying a filter. So I've used that PII field in this view. So I might only want to see contracts where it's relevant. So I'm going to select from that question only those contracts where PII is processed, and I'm going to hit save. And I can see there's only 3 in my system, which is great. And what I can do now is, now that I've got the fields that I want in the order that I want, and I've got the cut of like the selection of contracts visible, this is where I would probably go and hit save this view. And I can call this one, I don't know, GDPR risks, because of that personal data question. And when I hit submit here, that's now a new view in my saved views list in my contracts repository. So if maybe in 6 months time, maybe if we're being audited or something like that, and they're interested in how many of your contracts involve that processing of personal data, I can come here and not only tell them this is the list of them, but I'm also assessing our vendors from a cybersecurity risk standpoint as well, so I can see how risky they are right alongside the contractual information there.
James, I've got 2 follow-up questions, so I'll go with the first question for you here. So we all know that auditors at times can be very awkward and want to get the data. Can you just show the export function just real quick? We probably won't show the export result. It's a CSV file. But yeah, if you could just walk us through that quickly.
Yeah, well, once you've created this view of data, in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll have an export option to say this view, and then export all data. And you can export this page, which will basically give you only what's visible on the screen. But this middle one is for those scenarios where maybe you had over 20 entries, like you had lots and lots of contracts where you process personal data. So this middle option, I don't know if you can see, has created a CSV in my downloads that would just be, that I can open in Excel or Google Sheets, that will provide basically all of that metadata that we can see on screen at the moment. Really easy to do.
That's great. And question 2. So we've got the saved views there, so where I can see GDPR risks, and we have the 3 dots next to it. Could you just click over to saved views and go into saved views?
Over here, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That's okay. Is this to allow us to edit saved views once they are live, or to delete them?
Yeah,
exactly, I'm just thinking it'd be good to show people, like, once you've made a view, perhaps it's not fixed in stone forever.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways I guess you can edit save views. One is like, if you do want to clear up this list, maybe you've made dozens and dozens over time, and it's ballooned out of and it's not in order anymore. You can start deleting views, or you can rename them depending on whether the name makes sense anymore. What you can also do with a saved view is, if I'm on this GDPR risks one now, and let's go back and say that I actually did care about internal business owners for a particular contract, I can select those, add them to the view, and then if I hit save this view this time, I have the option to create a new view entirely, or I can say, actually no, I always want to see this in my GDPR risks view, and I can hit update the existing one and hit submit. So I'll still only have those two views, but now GDPR risk will always show me who's the internal business owner of these contracts.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate you running through saved views. As a user of Gatekeeper, saved views wasn't a thing, right? When I was using Gatekeeper, I wanted it so much, because and like, to your point, like, what I fundamentally wanted was the ability to have a saved view of my contract and vendor data at the same time, because there's just so much you can do with that information to be led by that data. So I appreciate that. Were you just going to have a look at vendors as well here, James?
Yeah, because I already had a few in my vendors repository in this Gatekeeper environment. So again, I've landed on my default one, but these ones are more budget orientated, so that show spend information. So we've got one here that's called expenditure versus financial risks. This will show us spend against a particular vendor record was compared with what we can consider forecast spend, which is the total value of all the contracts that we have that are recurring with this vendor. But similar to how we had GDPR and cybersecurity over on the contracts repository, we've got information that we pulled from CreditSafe on this side. So this view is showing us data points around how much we're spending with this vendor and how risky they are from a financial standpoint as well. So we've got information around that in this particular view.
Yeah, it's a good view to have, I think, this year, probably next year, probably any time of the year. But I think there's a lot more scrutiny around this. So yeah, I really like this one.
Yeah, And I think the next one is fairly similar. It's exposure versus total exposure versus risk. So there's an element of the same sort of information around how much is due to be spent with that vendor. So what's the total value of all the contracts in the system for them, and not just credit safe information like financial risk, but also same sort of information we saw on the contract side, cybersecurity risk, which is pulled through from security scorecard, our integration with them.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Safe Views is, it gives you so many options to do whatever you need to do with the data. And we're going to be talking in the next webinar next month around custom data. And depending on how many custom data points you have created within your Gatekeeper tenant, that's where it can get really exciting over here in terms of tracking various data points and having your Safe Views align to whatever it is you need your business to align to. So I think on the ESG side, that could be really powerful moving forwards.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you have, and we'll talk about custom data in more depth, but especially if you do have custom data sections for your vendors that where you're capturing information around things like ESG and any other compliance and due diligence forms like modern slavery, financial crime, anything like that. Being able to pull that from all those individual vendor records to a saved view in your repository and instantly be able to load that up, really powerful.
Yeah. For example, just really good to track any that don't have an ESG policy. If you're getting investor pressure or stakeholder pressure to have that, it's just so much easier just to suddenly see, yeah, out of my 250 vendors, 25 of them don't have this, and you can just focus your efforts there, perhaps set up an ESG workflow. And we do have something in the pipeline around a best practice workflow for ESG questionnaires coming up that you could just direct them through that and get that closed off real nicely. So I think this is great, almost in the sense that it enables you to project manage a little bit as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this feature. James, we've got through everything here. So we've gone through quarterly dashboard as a snapshot. We've got through teams, categories, entities as a different way of showing data. And we've gone through a live tutorial of how to make a saved view, what a saved view is, given some examples and just some general thoughts around how saved views could be used by people on this webinar who are watching right now. Before we move into any live Q&A and before we do our closing poll, there was just one thing we wanted to show real quick in the contract records, right? And I think you've got an Atlassian NDA, if I'm not mistaken, that we're just going to have a quick look at. So I'll let you get back to your standard view there as well.
Yeah, I need to find it. Yeah, there it is.
So what we're going to just show here, and it's kind of like the elephant in the room, I guess, when you look at the contract record here, is that we're bringing out a new feature, which is a contract AI summary powered by OpenAI. We spent a couple of months just thinking about this, looking into it, thinking of the good use cases of what we're seeing through ChatGPT and OpenAI, and a summary solution. Just it feels right. Like if for any of you that have played around with ChatGPT and understood how good it is at summarizing data, you'll probably get a lot of benefit from this. So we'll do a full product release and comms around this and how it uses, how it works and how it is going to be used and where data is transferred, because I appreciate that you'll want to understand all of that. But James, maybe just give us a brief view of this in a bit more detail, maybe.
Sure. So the way this will work is for those contracts that have a master contract draft against the record, and I think we talked about that in the last webinar, didn't we? That
could you just show that maybe in the files tab? Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So, and the way that you can get this is there's a few ways to do it, but the predominant way that you'll probably have a master draft against your contracts is if it's gone through a contract workflow and where it's negotiated and signed, and then Gatekeeper will automatically assume, rightly so, that this document represents the contract metadata record. So when you have a master record that has this flag against it in a contract document, Gatekeeper will, after it's OCR'd the text and processed it, using our OpenAI integration, provide this summary paragraph or two around summarizing the terms of the actual document itself. I think it's super useful. I guess for those for contract managers themselves, because this all falls into that visibility pillar, doesn't it, Daniel? For contract managers
Yeah.
themselves, they don't have to open up a PDF and be reading through the whole thing all the time if they want information about it. But I think this is going to be really powerful for maybe like putting things in layman's terms, because not everyone likes reading contract documents and not everyone's, skilled enough to do so. So being able to read a paragraph like this and just get the gist and get the key, the cliff notes of what a contract, pertains to, I think it's going to be really useful.
I've had, I think I shared this anecdote with you the other day, James. I've had roles in the past, right, where part of my role is to create contract management plans. And as part of that contract management plan, you create a contract summary. And sometimes you can have a nice short contract, just 7 or 8 pages, average 10 to 20 with a lot of software SaaS agreements. And then some of them you have 200-page agreements. So like it's just the variables are crazy there. And summarizing contracts isn't always the most fun thing to be doing when you know that actually I'm probably better placed managing the relationship or making sure the obligations are on track, or doing a million other things regarding that contract as opposed to summarizing it. So it's just another way of getting a lot of value out of something that once took a lot of time that can now be done automatically for you, right?
Yeah.
It's automated. That's great. No, James, awesome. I really appreciate you running through that. I think this is probably a good time to just say, if you've got any questions, we'll open up for some live Q&A in just a moment. Happy for them to come through chat or Q&A, wherever you feel comfortable doing that. We've got a bunch of people that can come in or provide any answers if need be. And Connie, in the background, we're going to run another poll, and this is around our next webinar. So you've heard James and I throughout this webinar discuss custom data, and custom data is incredibly powerful. And what we're looking at is that some of our customers are using it, some aren't. Some of you probably have no idea what it is, and some of you probably absolutely love using it. James and I have created lots of custom data points over the last few years. James, I don't know how many you've made. You've made a few for me in the past as well.
I've lost count. Yeah.
There's so much benefit to doing it. I like and you kind of touched on it in the saved use element, which is around data privacy. And I think I mentioned this in the previous webinar. I used to have to do a lot of tracking of PII, data transfers outside of the UK to the EU, outside of the UK to the rest of the world. And it was just super useful to have custom data points that I could filter and then go through all of that with the data privacy and risk teams. So you can get a lot of benefits out of that. So the poll's live. And really what we're trying to understand is what you want us to go through in that session. We will probably make this incredibly comprehensive. And our initial thoughts were kind of what those first 3 points are. So going through what is custom data in a little bit more detail, going through a setup of custom data. So what we've done here with Save Views, we would do that with custom data and show you how to configure it and like where you're assigning that custom data to sit, whether it's, say, for example, against a contract record or a vendor. And then as we start to then leave this visibility pillar behind, show how we can use it in some of our best practice workflows that we've just launched, and that will enable you to get the most out of various data points within workflows and just drastically improve the way in which you're dealing with vendors and your contracts. But at the same time, if there's something else you want to hear about, please let us know. Tick the something else box. Let us know in the chat now, and we'll follow up with you after this session. And we'll tailor that as much as possible to you. James, was there anything you wanted to say whilst the poll is live around custom data, or any thoughts around that? Not to put you on the spot, just wondering.
there's a few different use cases. Like you mentioned, one of probably the standard main use case there of extra data points you want to capture against your contracts or your vendors, really useful for later on being able to find that key information without having to, especially if you have hundreds and thousands of contracts, read through PDFs to find out which of them involve personal data clauses and things like that. But there's also other ways you can leverage it to connect data points together and, make a bit of an ecosystem. But there's bits of that happening in the best practice workflows, like you said, that's coming out.
Yeah. Actually, James, just whilst we're here, do you want to
Mm-hmm.
just quickly show where best practice workflows can be found and added, just whilst we've got a few minutes whilst this polls up?
Yeah, of course.
It might just be really a good use of time here. And maybe could you just set the premise of what a best practice workflow is for everyone?
Sure. Because I guess some people on this call might not have built workflows or know that much about them. So we're talking a lot about the visibility, the pillar, the benefit of Gatekeeper, but the workflows are the take control and restore compliance side. So they are very much orientated with regards to keeping your processes for managing your contracts and vendors structured and making sure everything that is happening in Gatekeeper, you've got oversight and control of it. But the best practice workflows can be found by workflow admins, so you have to be given the permission to build these in the first place. When you're in the workflow screen and you go add, in the templates area here, we've got a few pre-built workflows basically that capture or that can facilitate a key use case that Gatekeeper caters to. And against all of these workflows, basically, when you hit create, it will create the Kanban board with all the phases, the transitions, the ownership, the notifications, as much as we could have built into a template to make it ready to go. But alongside each of them, we have a setup guide as well that will take you to our knowledge base that we called out near the top of the call. Our knowledge base that has step-by-step guides on, first off, how to configure some of the final points to tailor it to how your organization works. But some of these can be changed in scope, like you can add some sophisticated features to them and some cool use cases there. And they'll also go through how to do all of those bits as well. So that's basically the overview of best practice workflows. And there's a few in this environment already that I've already created here just for testing myself and for playing around.
Yeah, we'll show these off over the next couple of webinars in particular. Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, James, like the way we were thinking about this is like, what is the best practice models that we're seeing from our customers, from our own experiences, from like the conversations that we've had internally. And so we've really tried to build like processes that are standardized as much as possible. And whilst enabling you, like to James's point, like if your process has a slightly different phase, it's so easy just to add in, and we've got all the steps there in the knowledge base articles. But what I really like about this, and I think this is the big ROI here, is that we all know like just mapping out processes and just thinking about process design can be incredibly taxing, and then digitalizing it can be incredibly taxing as well on time. But what this does is shortcuts all of that. You've got a foundation to start with, and you can get set up in minutes as opposed to hours or days with a process. And I think in particular on things like the, and I don't think we've got these on screen here, but like file expiries, contract renewals, so easy to get started there. So yeah, big fan of that. No, that's great. James, we are going to move into some Q&A, and we will kind of just bounce off one another here for this. James, we've been talking a bit about dashboards here, and we did kind of skirt over this, and I actually think we showed it on screen. But could you just show how we can change the default dashboard when a user, a customer of ours, someone on this call comes into Gatekeeper, and they say, for example, they don't want the exec dashboard to be where they land. Maybe they want another dashboard. Could you just show how to do that in the settings?
Yeah, so I mean, they can do it for them, a bit like enabling those weekly summary emails if that's something someone wants for their profile. They can do it for themselves by going to settings, by clicking their profile up there. And this default dashboard will only load up the available dashboards for a user. So if the user isn't an eSign admin or they don't have exact access to the exact dashboard, they won't be available to them. But you can see here, these are the ones that I can select be my default when logging into Gatekeeper. But I can do this for my other users if I'm a user admin and I think that they'll get more out of the quarterly dashboard than the exec by heading to users here, and I'll choose Patrick again because I'm editing his profile a lot today, and I can say of his dashboards when he logs in, rather than the executive one, I want him to land on quarterly, for instance, and select that for his profile.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate showing that off quickly. I think it's just, I came across it, like to your point, quarterly dashboard can be really good for some users as opposed to the executive dashboard. And it's such a quick thing to do in Gatekeeper via settings, or having whoever your Gatekeeper admin is within your business just set it up for you.
Yeah.
That's probably a good way to do that for sure. James, I know. Oh, sorry, go.
I was just going to take this one step further because I think this isn't
Sure.
necessarily a gatekeeper thing, but it's the case that I do this for a lot of other applications that we use, that and Gatekeeper facilitates it. So having this default dashboard and login is obviously useful, but if there are pages that you're visiting a lot, so like I do a lot of workflow config and playing around and stuff, Gatekeeper remembers a URL that you've entered even after you're authenticating. So if I take this example of this staging URL that I've got up here with workflows as the login option, if let's say I leave Gatekeeper and I'm coming back next week, if I use that as the URL I'm trying to access, you can see I've got workflows in it and hit enter. Even once I'm logged in, it won't take me to any other page. It takes me directly to workflows. So that's definitely useful. If you're someone who likes bookmarking pages and like storing things, in your bookmarks bar in your browser, definitely worthwhile. Rather than just only having one Gatekeeper page just to get in, if you have a few that you like to jump to really quickly, you can do it for the workflows page like I've done. This also works for saved views. So if you have a saved view that you've stored the URL for, you can bookmark that, meaning that you don't have to go into Gatekeeper, navigate to contracts and find the saved view. Just an interesting way of navigating the system. And like I said, it doesn't just apply to Gatekeeper. You can do that for your other applications as well.
Yeah. Actually, you just brought back some memories. I used to do the same for workflows, right? Because I used to live in
You're in them all the
contract
time.
review
Yeah.
and vendor onboarding workflows. That was my life. So yeah, really good way. And always like I think I mentioned earlier on in the webinar that you used to sometimes send these URLs out to the CFO or whoever. And just so when they log in, it takes them to that page directly, as opposed to the exec dashboard and then expecting them to navigate. When like we're all aware that you'll have a core group of people who absolutely know everything about Gatekeeper, and then it's like a scale coming down. So the people who use it less frequently won't know the navigation so well. It can really help do that. And how I look at that is it's like it's that adoption piece, right? Like when we're doing change management, like we want to make it as easy as possible for people to engage with vendors and contracts. So just little hacks like that, James, I think is a really good call out there for sure. Great. Maybe just one question. We did have one question come in around the OpenAI functionality and whether it's currently available. And in terms of that, it's not currently available just yet. We've got it in our staging tenant, so it just means we're testing it out and having some fun internally and just playing around with it. But it is currently due to be launched in our May product update. If there's any delays or anything like that, we'll give you as much notice as possible. But yeah, we look good for that at present. And yeah, this is just included free to all users on all plans as well. So it's not like an additional paid feature or anything like that. So you're good to start using it if you wish to. Of course, you don't need to, and you don't have to use it. It will be off by default as well. So we're perhaps on our next webinar, James, if it's after the May release, we could spend 2 to 3 minutes showing how to turn
switch it on,
the feature on. Yeah, just whilst we've got a few minutes there, I think that would be a good one to do. That's great. I'm just having a look here just to see if there's any questions. We did have one question, which was, can I create my own report? And in short, really, saved views is the best way and the ultimate way of doing that. James, I was just thinking, like, we're talking about reports. There is a reports tab that we do have in Gatekeeper with pre-built reports as well that anyone can access. What I was going to say is, like, if you click on any of these, our tenant here isn't very well populated compared to probably a lot of our customers. So we're probably going to get some blank responses. But what I would say to anyone as well is, like, if you haven't gone into your reports area and just had a look at how data is visualized, I would definitely suggest doing so. This one, James, that you're on now, Card Age, this is one that I used to spend a lot of time looking at post going live with Gatekeeper. So the goal with digitalizing is to make everything quicker, faster, more efficient. And what I wanted to know is, like, how long each card is sitting on each workflow or each phase, and to try and understand the bottlenecks there. So I can have a look across all of the workflows, or like your view there, I think you're showing is that you can click on any workflow in particular. I just found a lot of value out of this as a process person, trying to figure out how do we get 10% more out of our processes to make the process way quicker for the users, for my colleagues who are coming in, raising requests for contract reviews, onboarding. So I do think there's a lot of value in reports, and I appreciate we probably haven't gone over reports too much in the last 2 webinars. If you do want to see anything on that a little bit more, we're happy to cover that for sure. But yeah, any other thoughts around that? Just Safe Use is probably your go-to place to do everything, right?
That'd probably be what I'd suggest as a report, because like even you had me show before, like once you've got the data that you want, you can export it and do whatever you want with outside of Gatekeeper, like sending it to auditors or other members of the team if they just want to see that data instantly. So yeah, Save Use is probably the best bet for what I would consider a custom report.
James, I'm just seeing a live question come in here. How can I change the reporting currency? Just to throw you a little curveball compared to what we've been talking about. It's pretty straightforward, right?
I guess, yeah. I mean, you have to have multiple currencies in the tenant to begin with. So if you're a tenant configuration level admin, you can come here and navigate to the currencies area here. So this will be where you add additional currencies that you might contract in. We've got in this tenant already, we've got Euro, GBP, USD. We've got Bitcoin as well, just to have it, I guess.
So just for fun.
Yeah, just for fun.
I can remember seeing that a few years ago in here. No, that's great. Just maybe just one point here that we should make is that you do have to do the foreign exchange rate or the rate manually. So you may need to frequent this area just to stay abreast of that. So it's probably good to work with your finance team in parallel here and to figure out how you're monitoring and tracking all of this internally.
Yeah, if you are really hot on making sure cross-currency contracts are represented accurately, it does let you know when the currency was last updated, so you can see what exchange rate has been used so far in like calculations in Gatekeeper. But yeah, it doesn't update live. This has to be changed deliberately by users when they want it to be reflecting the real life currency exchange rate.
Yeah, sure. James, one question that just came in: does Gatekeeper offer API capability? It'd be good to know if it could be pulled into any BI solutions, Tableau, things like that. And in short, yes, there's the answer to that.
Yeah, we definitely does. Like as by just talking API, we have the Gatekeeper open API, so that whatever clients want, if they have access to it, whatever clients want to do, they can pull data as and when. And similarly, they can use it the other way around to push data into Gatekeeper if you're connecting Gatekeeper to other tools that you do use to deal with vendors, like maybe like sales tools or CRM tools, things like that. So we have an open API, and it also has webhooks if you want to get a bit more advanced. But we also have just a Zapier integration. So for a lot of our clients, if they don't have like a business analyst resource that can set this sort of thing up, obviously the procurement teams that do are really hot on it and will normally be using our API for that sort of thing, pulling data out and pushing it to a business BI tool. But if they don't, Zapier works just as well. It's a sort of do-it-yourself configuration tool, and you can.
It's super easy to use, right? It's so straightforward. You can take data out of Gatekeeper, put it in so many different places, and automate it, right? It's like the benefit of low-code, no-code solutions there. Really good to connect wider tech stacks within your business with very little effort. And like you said, James, like if you don't have dedicated team members who can code or spend their time setting this up, Zapier can be a really good way of doing that.
So yeah, even on the configuration screen here, it even gives you some like suggested zaps. So zaps being that push and pull of data between Gatekeeper and another system. So really easy to set up.
Yeah, that's great, James. Well, firstly, thanks again for doing all of the hard work here and going through all of that. I can appreciate it's a lot to go through on your end, but no, I appreciate the level of detail you've gone into there. And also thanks to everyone that's come along, listened into this. You'll get sent a copy in due course of this recording. We'll be making more content off of all of these ideas and topics discussed. And we already have most of this, or if not 99% of all of this, over on the knowledge base. So I would suggest definitely go check that out. You'll get so much out of that. Just have a quick read. James has done a lot over there with GIFs, videos, and just a lot of other visual cues for you to like set things up so much easier. So check that out. Thanks again for coming to this webinar. We will let you know in the next couple of weeks when the next one is. It's definitely due in May for custom data, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.